$37 million. That's what the Pentagon's Civilian Protection Center costs every single year. 1 year. And it just got gutted. Not by Congress, not by a vote, not by any formal legal process. It got hollowed out by executive action because one man decided protecting civilians during wartime was woke. Stay with me because this story connects directly to at least 150 dead school children and a federal law that's now being openly violated. So here's what we're going to figure out together. First, how does a Pentagon watchdog group end up saying the Department of Defense is breaking federal law? Second, why would anyone fire the people specifically hired to prevent civilian casualties? And third, what does this tell us about where this administration is actually headed when it comes to the rules of war? We'll get to all three, but to make sense of any of it, you need to understand one thing about how the Pentagon actually works. The Inspector General isn't some partisan outfit. It's the Pentagon's own internal watchdog. When they say you're breaking the law, that's not politics. That's a formal accusation from inside your own house. Let's start with the facts on the ground. Back in 2022, Congress passed a law, not a suggestion, a law. It created something called the Civilian Protection Center of Excellence. The name tells you everything. This wasn't some bureaucratic make-work job. This was a deliberate response to decades of what the military calls collateral damage. You know what that means? Dead civilians, thousands of them, over the years. The wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, the numbers are staggering. So Congress said, enough. We're going to create a center. We're going to hire experts. We're going to put in place procedures so that before a missile hits a target, somebody actually verifies that the target is what we think it is. They hired a senior advisor named Wes Bryant to run the verification team. You want to know his background? He worked under a United Nations war crimes investigator. Think about that. The Pentagon's Civilian Protection Center was being run by someone who had literally studied the aftermath of what happens when militaries don't protect civilians. He knew what failure looked like. He knew the consequences. Then Elon Musk and DOGE came in, and they started firing people. Not investigating, not auditing, just firing. And they fired 90% of the staff at this center. 90% gone. Bryant and his colleagues were told they were engaged in fraud, waste, and abuse. Protecting civilians was classified as woke. Think about that language, woke. That's what they called it, a legal requirement to verify targets before striking them. That's woke now. But here's where it gets worse. The Pentagon's own Inspector General looked at what happened and issued a formal report. The report says the Department of Defense is likely not complying with federal law. Not anymore, because the center that's supposed to verify targets before strikes, it can't do that anymore. It doesn't have the staff. It doesn't have the resources. The meeting stopped. Personnel were reassigned or fired. Funding dried up. And there was no formal decision by Secretary Hegseth. No formal congressional action. Just a quiet dismantling. Now, why does this matter right now? Because on February 28th, a school in Iran got hit by what the New York Times confirmed was an American missile. At least 150 school children died. The Pentagon said it was complex. Admiral Brad Cooper told Congress it was complex because the school happened to be on an active Iranian military base. Congressman Adam Smith, the ranking Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, didn't buy it. He asked the admiral a direct question. He asked if it's ever appropriate for military leadership to use the words "no quarter" when describing operations. No quarter. That's an old military term. It means no mercy. Take prisoners. No surrender. Just kill. And Hegseth has used that language publicly. Smith said something that should chill you. He said, "I do not trust that answer." And he said it because of what's happened. The actions, the inactions, the statements, the gutting of the Civilian Protection Center, the firing of the people whose job was to prevent exactly what happened on February 28th. Look, here's the thing. Even if you believe the strike was necessary, even if you believe Iran deserved retaliation, there's still a difference between war and war crimes. That difference used to be called the law of armed conflict. It's international law. It's what separates us from the people we're fighting. And that law requires verification. It requires procedures. It requires the kind of center that just got dismantled. Wes Bryant, the whistleblower, worked in a department called Civilian Protection. When Hegseth took office, the transition team immediately identified it as a target. Why? Because Hegseth's obsession, according to people who work with him, is lethality, killing. There's no room in that worldview for protecting civilians. There's no room for procedures. There's no room for verification. There's just room for operations. The Pentagon's own Watchdog group is now saying this administration is breaking federal law, not bending it, breaking it. And they did it by quietly firing the people whose job was to enforce it. That's not a scandal. That's a strategy. And the strategy is working. Because now when missiles hit schools, there's nobody left to verify the target. There's nobody left to say, wait, that's a school. There's nobody left to slow down the process long enough for someone to check Google Images. But here's the part that should keep you awake. Congress didn't authorize this. The law is still on the books. The center is still legally required to exist and function. But it doesn't function anymore. It's been hollowed out. And the people who hollowed it out are betting that by the time anyone really understands what happened, the center will be so degraded that rebuilding it will seem impossible. That's how institutional destruction works. You don't blow it up, you starve it. You fire the people, you stop the meetings, you redirect the funding, and then you say it's too complicated to fix. The Pope spoke out about this. He said there are real consequences to war, real human consequences. And those consequences matter most when they involve children. Civilian casualties aren't abstract policy debates. They're dead people. And the people who are supposed to prevent them just got fired. So what happens next? The Inspector General's report is public. Congress knows about it. Adam Smith knows about it. And the Pentagon is still not in compliance with federal law. That's not a gray area. That's not a complex investigation. That's a clear violation. And it was done deliberately. And it's still ongoing. This matters because it tells you something about how this administration operates. When a law gets in the way, they don't change the law. They just stop following it. They fire the people who enforce it. They starve the institutions. And they bet that you won't pay attention long enough to hold them accountable. If you've made it this far, you're already further along than most people watching this unfold. Drop a thought in the comments. What surprises you most about how this actually works? Because honestly, most people have no idea that federal law can just be ignored this casually. Now, here's what becomes impossible because of all this. The Pentagon can no longer claim it's following the law of armed conflict. That claim is dead. The Inspector General killed it. And here's what becomes inevitable. More strikes, more civilian casualties, more schools, more children. Because the only thing standing between a target list and a missile used to be a center full of people whose job was to verify. And that center is gone. Something specific is still in motion. The House is about to vote on the War Powers Resolution Act. The Senate already passed it. That vote could force some accountability. But MAGA Mike Johnson shut down the House before they could take it up. So right now, there's a window. Congress could still act. They could still demand that the center be restored. They could still force compliance with federal law. But that window is closing. And the longer it stays closed, the harder it becomes to rebuild what was dismantled. What's your read on this? Do you think Congress will actually push back, or is this the new normal?